Okay, we are live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And after much ado about something, welcome to this meeting of the Mahone Bay Town Council, and welcome to our friends at home that are watching us on YouTube. We'll begin by acknowledging that we are gathered together tonight in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today, we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. You have an agenda that was emailed to you.
Mayor, move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Okay. Seconded. I would make one small addition, and that would be the report of the meetings that were held with the Minister of Municipal Affairs, John Rohr. One meeting held here, and the second one was an NSFN meeting for the mayors at last week as well. So with that amendment, if the mover and the seconder have no problem with that.
In terms of the meetings, we update on the deputy mayor's meeting.
Oh, yeah.
No, we don't do updates on the mayor's meetings. We had this discussion before. We don't do that at this meeting.
You had indicated you wanted, so I was just reminding you.
Well, there was one item that we were going to discuss.
Yeah, so
And that was the anti-racism committee,
yeah.
I believe. So we would add the anti-racism committee as well under new business. Okay? All right. All in favor of the agenda as presented and amended? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to the minutes of the regular meeting of the 9th of November. What is your wish? Oh, we've got three people. Go ahead. Somebody say something.
I move that we accept them as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Burdick. Okay. Moved and seconded. You've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you. We have no presentations. We go to correspondence. Item 4, action items. There are none. Item 5, correspondence. We have quite a number of them. What is your wish, Councillor? Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, given our recent practice with regard to 66 Claremont, I move that we refer item 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, 5.7, 5.8, and 5.9 to the members of the PAC and to the planners.
Okay. Do we have a seconder?
Well, I was just going to suggest adding the letter that we received after the fact, but I don't believe it's in this.
I don't think that letter's in the public domain.
If I may, no, we received a letter that was trapped in some kind of email quarantine, and that was forwarded to council after the agenda was published. So it has been sent to council. That normally would have been added to the agenda under the approval of the agenda, but
It was here in time, had it been realized that it would have been included in the agenda.
yes, it was trapped in email quarantine for
Okay.
some time by the time I found it.
Okay.
As well as that item, which I guess would be 5.12.
Okay. So, we need a seconder. Councillor Wilson. Moved and Councillor Carver.
Okay, for discussion. Of the
Go ahead.
items. I just had a question about 5.6, the letter from Logan Webb
Wait,
in relation.
that's not in.
That wasn't one of the ones that was
I
included.
wasn't, sorry.
5.6 and 5.10 and 5.11 were not included in
Sorry,
the
I thought
motion.
we were on receiving file, I'm sorry.
Okay. So All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried, so those items will be referred to the PAC. And the remaining 3 information letters will be Council Burdick.
I move that those be received and filed.
Thank you. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, but I second, and then
Okay.
there was a question that Councillor Kaba had about
Yes, thank you. The letter from Public Works in response to a request about the
Sanding.
department sand rather than salt in the area by the watershed. My question is about the process, because I think that letter went on behalf of the watershed committee.
It did.
But it has come back to council, so I'm just curious about the process. There just
So,
seems to be a little.
I believe the watershed committee recommended it to council and council approved that the letter be sent. So it came back to council that way. So council could refer this
Yeah.
letter back to the watershed committee for their information. I think that would be appropriate to do.
It's a small thing, but I was a little confused, and I looked back at the watershed minutes, and I didn't see the recommendation to council, so
I think that's what we did.
We did,
Yeah, I
we
believe we did.
recommended that the council, that they write a letter to DOT to ask for sanding only in the watershed area. And finally, this is the response we've got, so we'll wait and see what the local.
I mean, the good thing is if we do refer this back to the committee now, by the time that we have a committee meeting, we'll probably have an answer.
Well,
We'll hopefully have an answer.
Yeah. Haven't heard anything yet.
I didn't think the answer was particularly definitive. It's gonna get
Yes.
referred to the
It's
local
referred to the local
operator.
superintendent.
superintendent. Yeah, that's.
I assume from here that Jonathan or myself, or perhaps Kelly, because she sent the letter, will hear directly, but we haven't. I don't know if there'll be another letter.
Okay, on the motion. Sorry, Councillor Burdick, do you have a question?
Well, I would then like to amend that if it's agreeable to forward that particular. Wait, is that me? No. To forward 5.6 to the watershed committee. And receive and file the others.
I mean, you got to get the seconder, but it sounds
Yeah.
reasonable.
Well, we still have a motion on the floor.
She was just amending.
That was-
You're amending, friendly amendment,
Friendly amendment.
and you're in agreement with that, and I think it was the deputy mayor who seconded it.
Yes.
Yes, it was. And then you included in that the fact that Councillor Carter wanted to make a comment. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded as amended. All in favor? The motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to staff reports. 6.1, staff report to council.
So as usual, Mr. Mayor, it's the second meeting a month, so there are a lot of updates included, but we'll take questions if there are.
Any questions? Councillor Feeney.
Just one question on item 13. We spoke about it the last meeting around the chargers. I noticed yesterday by happenstance that behind the pharmacy where we're intending to have the installation of 2 of the chargers, there's a parking spot that has a large reserved for the pharmacy sign on it. And then the next one, of course, is the blue parking spot, accessibility parking spot. I was curious to know if the CAO has a view on my understanding was that it was mostly town property all the way through all those parking lots. But maybe I'm just mistaken, and I'm just so with regard to the parking spots there and the decision that we've made to put in the chargers, will that essentially be the first 4 of those parking spots that will not be available to at-large public?
Well, yeah, the first 4 will end up being designated in some way or another.
Okay.
I mean, obviously the accessible parking is available to anyone who's got the, right to use that spot.
Fair enough.
But yeah, and as far as the property line there, and there may be something that was a historical agreement with the town. To my knowledge, the entire property, like every parking space there is on town property.
It was honestly the first time I ever noticed the sign, and maybe I've driven by it 1,000 times over many years, and it just never occurred to me that I did notice that sign yesterday, and I always thought that was town property, so
I think
anyway.
I think they generally park their, I would say, van there.
I'm sure,
That's what I
There
said.
probably was a
Yeah.
discussion at some point. I mean, it would have been years ago before my time, but I wouldn't imagine they'd have done it without asking. I just don't know if we'd have a paper trail.
thank you, Dylan.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Deputy Mayor.
On the report number 19 that talks about minimum standards for housing being reflected in the housing strategy. I know that there's a DEF 2021 date there, sort of tentative, and wondering if that's very close. It's clearly a few days to December. What your thoughts are there? And,
Yeah, I think there's a few references in here to the housing strategy, and that December date really just represents when the housing strategy would be initiated.
yeah.
So there is an intention to have an initial report, staff report to council, mostly to, figure out those first initial steps that we might take, set the timeline over the course of I think it's two years that it's spread over 18 months or so in the strategic plan. And as far as the minimum standards, obviously they're not going to be reflected in a completed strategy by December. But I did intend that I would reference that in the report in order to make sure we didn't lose track of it. So that's the intention there. And we've talked before about what that timeline might be predicated on. So obviously there's availability of statistical data coming from StatsCan throughout 2022, and then where the province is going. So we'll have a discussion on the 14th of December and go from there.
Yeah, who will create that standard? Or how will that proposed standard be developed, which will be presented to council? Will it be discussion with Lunenburg and MODL and Bridgewater, or will there be a housing consultant involved? Or?
Well, the question of regionalism and regionalization of a strategy is part of what we have to determine going forward. So under one scenario, we approach housing strategy at a regional level, and I think minimum standards would be something that would be a good discussion at that level, particularly in terms of enforcement capacity. Like we're all dealing with a relative shortage of building inspectors, and a lot of things that typically fall under minimum standards require some level of professional assessment. So, Al, as our bylaw enforcement person, is not necessarily in a position to evaluate everything that would appear in a minimum standards bylaw. So probably would have a tie into building inspection service, and that's a regional service, so there's a lot of crossover. But I think there's some question about what the initial steps need to be in town. Broadly speaking, I think one of the first things that would be needed is more information from our community about concerns having to do with minimum standards. So council will decide if we're going to go out and engage and try to collect some of that information and determine the extent of the issue and hear from the public. But I did think I would introduce that question because especially over the winter months can be a good time to engage in those activities.
And you say that's the 14th of December that we would be.
Get an initial report and talk about where we're going.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else about that particular item? No? Okay. Anything else in the report that you'd like to question?
Sorry, Mayor, no, I'm on to the next item, pardon me. Okay, sorry, just jumping ahead.
Okay. Well, hearing none. Thank you, CAO, for your report. Let's go to the 2022 Town of Mahone Bay meeting schedule.
Colorful calendar. So I guess again, this is presented for council. I'm not going to walk through all of it. There's a couple points I wanted to make before we take questions about this. Obviously, this is council's calendar, it's at your discretion. We do put this out there so that the public can know when to expect meetings to happen, which they may wish to participate in or they might want to follow. But it has to work for council. One big change this year is the inclusion of budget meetings on the calendar. This is mostly to help us figure out when we want these to be. These are some proposed dates. The thought that I followed here, Luke and I have talked about this every year, and we were for 2 years on the first May council meeting to finish the budget process. Last year it ended up being the second May council meeting. We're gonna try every year to do one earlier, so we're aiming for the second April meeting, but based on the feedback here tonight, we might end up moving back towards May as a deadline. It depends on people's availability to start the process in March. So happy to get some feedback. I don't know if anybody feels uncomfortable speaking publicly around availability. If so, we may need to defer finishing this to another meeting, but if anybody's willing to talk about their availability, I know Mo wants to get this out the door as soon as possible.
Councillor Kerr.
So I like the idea of having the budget meetings marked in the calendar, but I'm wondering about the timing of the meetings. Are they in the evening? They're going to be 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock. And is there any appetite amongst council members to try for a daytime meeting?
Which is what we had done in the past. There was a couple of like ramp up meetings, but then it would be an all day
So the
public
last
session.
couple of years, we've gone and done kind of a combination.
Yes,
The first one where Luke presents the budget and it's just basically a 2-hour presentation was an evening meeting. The second one where questions are raised, discussion takes place, was a daytime, was a morning, kind of more of a substantial meeting. And then after that, we typically had lunchtime or evening, but a little shorter meetings to go over grants and things like that. So breaking it up rather than trying to do it over just like a marathon couple of days does give us a chance to go back and make adjustments the council has requested and gives everybody a chance to think about things. So I do prefer to spread it over 4 weeks like that, but yeah, if people want to try to tighten it up, we can do that too.
I had another question about the calendar, if I may.
yes, please.
I noticed that the audit committee and the asset management committee are on the same day, if I have the colors right. And I just wonder how that works in terms of timing.
So asset management meets at noon and the audit committee traditionally has met in the evening.
If I may, Your Worship.
Yes, please.
There is another meeting, police advisory board meetings fall on the same day as the council meeting as well, but that's the same thing. Police advisory board meets at noon.
Oh, it
council
does.
meeting-
Okay. I thought it met then, but it used to meet right before council.
So that just changed with the public input sessions because we couldn't, yeah.
Deputy Mayor.
So I'm okay discussing availability for the budget meetings. I think March, I can only make one. The last meeting, the first one, the 24th may not be. There's a possibility it won't be able to make it. So it will be very much and the possibility of sort of doing day meetings. Yes, but the day will probably determine whether we might be able to make it. I sort of see that we don't have meetings on Fridays. Fridays would work for me. But Mondays to Thursday will probably not be able to make it.
Sorry, I wanted to ask about as far as the 24th. My suggestion would be if we didn't have the 24th, that we add a second budget meeting the first week of April. I'm not sure how people feel about that. We have planning advisory scheduled for the 5th, which might happen, it might not, depending on the agenda. And then we have a budget meeting on the 7th. So it would be an additional budget meeting on the Monday or the Wednesday of that week.
So just.
Oh, well, this would actually be in the morning, this one. So it could be any day that week.
And what about the Friday, April 1st? That would be 2 meetings that, oh, sorry, that's a lot of meetings. Sorry, yeah, my eyes skipped over what that last week of March is like. No, that's sorry, councilors.
Yeah, I'll be away as well on the 24th, so similar conflict to the deputy mayor, so.
If we did do a morning session, because I forgot that this would then be the second one, so the first one would be the evening of the 29th, and then a morning the following week. Francis, the reason we've done that traditionally is to be, people are fresh to have discussion because that's the first discussion meeting.
Yeah.
Is there I know you're just back from vacation, that might be harder to ask, but.
Yeah. And the challenge is we have a meeting on the 7th, and I'm assuming that's a day.
If we have the morning one on either the 4th, 5th, or 6th, the 7th could be an evening. The 7th would probably be, I'm just trying to project, we'll spell these out better, but it would probably be a discussion of like getting into some of the utility details, for example, is likely the 3rd meeting.
Yeah, so the way it works for me, like for instance, if I do the Monday, like take time off to do that, I have to make it up, and Thursday will be the day that I can make that up. So if
Thursdays at night, then you're
yeah,
okay.
then I'm okay for Monday, yes.
See if there's another thing to consider. Alice has
Hi,
Councilor.
sorry. My preference in general, looking at this, is that in general, it be also in the evenings. And I also would prefer it if it were earlier in the evenings, but I understand that that's difficult with the staff schedules and everything. But again, work is often, till a certain, other work outside of council is usually till a certain time.
So we can do them all in the evening if people are agreeable to that. I just don't know how people feel. And it's always fine with me, but I don't know if that's okay with everybody else.
It's fine, maybe. I'm just wondering to Councilor Burke's point, what about an earlier start? Is that a 5:30 start work for anybody or not?
I mean, I've always found it exceedingly difficult because our work day goes till 4:30 or 5, and there's no way to get home then. A 2-hour break's kind of the minimum.
You're kind of key to this.
And I imagine Luke agrees because he also has children at home.
Well, I'd like to see at least one daytime session if that were possible. So
Well,
The daytime sessions have always been very productive. So, I mean, I think if we have one daytime session, but it's choosing when you need it.
but it should be typically the second meeting, like once Luke's laid everything out and you guys have a week in between and then.
Yeah, the meet
Like
one,
Friday, yeah.
the meeting, the all day one.
Yeah, the meeting on the 7th or the 8th, or, if that's amenable to people.
Yeah, I guess, it could be that the meeting on the 7th
14th.
becomes a morning, but I'd rather squeeze another one.
So to make up for the 24th, why not just have a meeting on the week of the 24th to the 30th in April? An evening meeting?
Yeah.
30th.
So 26th probably, it's a Tuesday.
Would,
Or we can do away with our a Monday policy and strategy.
that's what I was just gonna ask, would it be okay to, I mean, it is policy and strategy, it's the budget, it's the biggest strategic thing.
Yes.
Because that would be a nice fit to take that one and.
Let's put it on the 25th,
28th.
25th.
The 25th is policy.
instead of
strategy.
policy and strategy on the
Replace that with the
24th.
final budget.
Oh,
meeting.
pardon me, you're looking at April.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that way,
Yeah, sure.
that would be the final budget meeting, and it's still time that you could make a recommendation to yourselves on the 28th,
Uh-huh.
if everything were, ready, and finish the process.
I probably can't make an evening meeting on the 14th, but I can do any of the other ones.
You can't do an evening on the 14th. What about the 13th?
14th might just be a noon time, we're close to the end of the process of that, we'll just have to see, where we are. Because there's not a lot of other days that week, I don't think. It's Easter. April's short.
So may I just clarify? So we will not have a meeting on budget meetings. We will not have a budget meeting on March 24th. We will have an evening meeting on Tuesday, March 29th. We will have the April 7th. Is that going to be a daytime one, or is that one, do we want to move that to
The
a
7th would be
Friday? That was one I wasn't sure. of.
Okay,
Is
well,
that gonna be
if the 8th in the morning is better, it's totally fine with me whether it's the 7th or 8th in the morning, that doesn't matter.
That's better for me.
Friday
For
morning.
what it's worth.
Okay.
Friday morning versus Thursday.
Okay, and then we have one on the 14th, which may be a noontime meeting, which will be determined as we get closer and see where we are in the process.
It's mostly whatever the big discussion is on the 8th. Luke then has had time to come back with something and go over that, so.
And then a meeting on the 20th. And then then we will not have policy and strategy on April 25th, but instead have that other budget meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, last night at the Joint Services Board meeting, there was a discussion around requiring a motion with regard to September 30th, the new National Day of Reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was some notion that whether that holiday was going to be fixed on the 30th or was going to be changed to the last Friday of September, it was going to float a little bit. Are we required to, and whether the federal government has actually turned that into a ongoing, forever codified statutory holiday, or whether the decision was really the statutory holiday for next year, and then there'll be a new date that would be updated. So I'm not sure where if the protocol offices have weighed in on that yet or not.
So from our perspective, we've just said our policy has been that we respect federal statutory holidays and will follow their lead. So we didn't really make a separate decision to go with the 30th. We don't really have to revisit it if that changes.
Okay, so we'll just follow whatever the federal government decides.
Yeah. that's
Yes, for
fair.
that day.
Okay,
Uh,
sounds good to me.
If I Google it, it says that Friday, September 30th, 2022 is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation.
So
And
it's
even
the
if for some
30th.
reason it changes, well, it wasn't our fault. We did our due diligence and we made the calendar now and we'll just move the day.
Yeah.
It was just to the benefit of staff. If something from, federal government's protocol changed, it was just, as long as staff would benefit.
It was a
from whatever
Thursday this
changes.
year, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's the 30th of September. Okay.
Yeah, it would be, I think there's a lot of logic in making it the Friday instead of the 30th, but we'll see what happens. Having a lineup next week.
Okay. Anything else? I will make the same note this year that I made last year. The days between Christmas and New Year's should not be marked it's either a stat holiday or it's office closed. November 11th is a stat holiday and the office is closed. But those days between Christmas and New Year's, 3 of them are because we are choosing to close the office, not because they're statutory holidays. And I would like to see that differentiation.
Well, I guess like I did last year, I'll point out the staff perspective, as we discussed last year and the council went with, was noting those as 2 separate things only adds confusion for the public. It is the same thing from their perspective.
Well,
And
then
that's the purpose of the council.
there is a note going around from the public who want clarification and they want to know why town hall is closing, even for tomorrow afternoon. They're saying the people who follow social media are saying that it is not clear, and in the interest of transparency, town hall should make it clear why the office is being closed.
So why is it closed tomorrow?
Training.
So
No.
we typically in the course of the fall have a half-day closure during holiday preparations. This year was elected to have that early in the season to decorate the office spaces because this is our first year back in the office all together now with COVID. So that's the half day. It's the only half day that staff will have. I think most staff take some period of time, and if we leave the office open, not all the staff can participate in that activity.
Then tell the public that.
I think we have.
I think we did.
Not that it's going to be closed. The public are asking why is it being closed?
Wasn't the explanation in the social media
I
that I
didn't,
read online?
I didn't see it.
So
My understanding was that there was, I mean, it's not like we go into exceeding amounts of detail, but an explanation was posted. And the last time we had an office closure briefly was due to a staff shortage that was unforeseen. And in these days of COVID, I think that's understood to be something that does
Okay.
happen.
Deputy Mayor?
So from my perspective, I think if the public are asking for an explanation about this, you can tell them they don't need an explanation. They need to know that the office is closed. If we're saying why we're closing, it won't be in the calendar. It will be either the website or social media post. It cannot be in the calendar. I don't think that making it more complicated will be very helpful for us. It will just be many colors. It's already confusing for me right now, just looking at it. So adding another codification will be difficult. I understand. So as a resident, if I'm not a member of council, I should be tracking my statutory holidays. Council doesn't need to provide to me statutory holidays. I know what those are. What council needs to tell me is the office open, which is told me through the calendar. I think that's how I'd interpret it.
Councilor Burdick?
Thank you. When I'm looking at the calendar and I'm looking at the yellow squares for the office closed, it's not that many really over the course of the year. So I don't know if, I personally agree also that that's not absolutely necessary to
Okay.
differentiate between the two types of closures.
It's a what? A different,
I don't know that it's necessary to differentiate between the different types of closures.
Councilor Carver?
Yes, I agree. I'm satisfied with the yellow squares the way they are, as designated as office closed, and that there be a regular practice of posting on social media or putting on the website a reason for closure. I mean, it's pretty regular that the office, it is notified on public social media that the office will be closed for a staff holiday. And I don't see a need for anything more.
Okay. Councilor Wilson?
Well, I think let's call a spade what it is. It's the people are wanting to know why staff are getting a vacation between Christmas and New Year's. That it's not coming off of their staff holiday, their vacation pay, and it's not coming out of their sick pay. It's just gratuitously given to them when it isn't given to people that run the shops in town.
I
Okay.
guess the question would be why no one gives us the benefit of the doubt and assumes that we wouldn't be using our vacation time, which we are. So I don't understand why people would take that position. The day the office is closed to allow staff to take vacations, it's actually quite difficult because the office is open all the rest of the year for those staff to take vacations. So those provide 3 days in which they can take vacation.
Thank you. Clerk was,
Same comment.
okay?
Yeah, so I mean, this item was well litigated when we moved to this policy, and it's a much more efficient situation because there's very little traffic during that week, almost not even
Christmas week
traffic.
is very quiet.
These are not statutory holidays or extra holidays for staff. Staff can avail of their vacation, amounts to take vacation during that week, but it's not extra. It's not extra on top of their allocated resource vacation days or statutory holiday. That's not true. What we've decided as what the staff's decided, and I agree with wholeheartedly, is that this is the most efficient way to manage the workload of the team and to make sure that why have a person in here when you go 3 days and not one soul walks through the door, forcing them to be in here, and then they'll take vacation when there's a busy time of the year. So I think this was a good policy. I
Okay,
don't think we should make any changes.
Councillor Noun and Councillor Wilson.
I agree with the way it is on the calendar, with just the yellow saying the office is closed. But I think that the public should be made aware as to why. If you're using vacation time during that period between Christmas and New Year's, perfect. But let the public know that they're not thinking, oh, look at all the time off that employees are getting. Let the public know that they know that this is what's happening, that they're all taking their vacation time because it's a slight time of a year. And I agree that that is true. So, just that I think the public wants to know so that they aren't thinking, town staff is getting 5 days off gradually. So,
Okay, Councillor Wilson, then Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize for saying what I said the way I said it, but my point still remains. I'm on council and I didn't know this was a policy, and I didn't know that these were vacation days that would be taken voluntarily by staff. And I can guarantee you the bulk of the people in town don't know that either. And so that needs to be clarified.
Okay,
That I'm sure is what you're doing.
Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Carver.
But I think also as residents in this community, we should have an understanding that staff work an entire year. They need to take time off. That time is, everybody wants to be with their family, to be able to enjoy that. It's good for mental health. It's important that we don't create the perception that to a certain extent staff are slaves, right? Staff are supposed to be able to take time off. And this is just an option to be able to ensure that they're taking time off in a very supported environment. And so I think also on our part as councillors, it's our role to sort of have that conversation and say, well, staff deserve that time off. Staff need to be allowed to take time off at that time. So it's baffling for me that that time of the year we can have this kind of conversation. I think we can, as councillors, have that tough conversation if somebody out there thinks that staff are not taking advantage of the system. From my perspective, I don't think so. Even in other government positions, people take time off around that time because it's the most convenient. Not that they're taking extra time, because it's a time where you can be able to do that, given the busy schedules that folks have. So I think that narrative needs to change, and it starts with us to a certain extent.
Councillor Carver.
Well, it gives me joy to think that staff get that time, and it could be arranged. And I think one item or one point that could be added to an explanation whenever it's given is that with such a small staff, it's impossible really to arrange skeleton staffing over a holiday period. And I'm sure that staff will develop a very comprehensive, succinct message for the public. And I think that Councillor Wilson's point about not knowing about this as a policy, I think it's a practice rather than a policy.
Yeah, it's not only a policy.
I think it was discussed during the last council term, I believe. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure how the new councillors would have been aware of it.
Okay. All right. So we'll leave it as it is. And if there is an understanding, am I right in suggesting that staff are taking vacation time for the days, or they're not?
So the office is closed to
Yes.
allow staff to take vacation time. There are a lot of staff who will not have the option of taking vacation time or otherwise have work complete, and they'll still be working.
Okay.
also there'll be staff in here, but it's just that the office is closed.
Yeah, the office is closed. I mean, we obviously Public Works and water, wastewater can't take a
Can't
full
do-
week off.
Yeah.
I typically can't take a full week off, but the staff who can would like to and will.
Okay.
Sarah.
All right.
So we did have one change, because I know Mo, you got the times of day, but that's not recorded. We had one actual change to your calendar, which was the deletion of the budget meeting, the first budget meeting, and the replacement of the April strategy and planning or strategy and policy with budget.
There were actually, then there was a second one, April 7th becomes April.
Oh, yes, thank you.
So we would be looking for a motion to approve as amended.
So
And we don't have the other side of the calendar yet.
We do, that is not something that comes to council.
No.
Because that goes through the, our waste haulers.
Whatever we get, we get.
Yeah, go to as much choice.
We don't have.
Okay,
So I'll move that we accept the council meeting schedule as amended.
thank you. Seconded by the deputy mayor. You've heard the motion on the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to staff report on the vaccination policy.
So we have presented the policy here. Council directed staff to develop a vaccination policy. We did do a pretty extensive search around what other municipalities were doing. Took a lot of inspiration from some of those. Most have or are in the process of taking a similar approach. There's been some discussion around the scope in terms of application to council members and volunteers serving. Those are not absolutely universal, but generally I think the further along municipalities are, the closer they're ending up to a policy like this. So as is the case with all our policies, this would be presented for consideration to the next meeting. But obviously, if there are questions or suggestions for amendments, we can discuss it now.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the broad scope. I'd rather that we limit that to employees of council and not go further to volunteers and board and committee members, especially in the situation where we're doing virtual meetings. I don't see the point in starting picking up, calling a battle that the province has created to now start impacting volunteers that we have, which we don't have an abundance of in the first place. So I'd say if we can stick to employees of council, that would be better.
Please, yes.
So the main group of volunteers that we have is the volunteer fire department. That's the main group of volunteers that we have. And I know that there's been a lot of push for the province to mandate the vaccination of fire responders. That hasn't happened yet, but it may. But I think that because they are emergency services for the community, it would be, a really good step to take to require the vaccination. I think it is, broadly speaking, they generally are vaccinated, and I don't expect a significant challenge with getting this through. There may be some.
Yes,
Well,
Councillor.
on the other side of the coin is, we do receive a stipend every year, so therefore we are considered in lots of cases employees, because we get a T4 from the town and that type of thing. And, I found that throughout the years, depending on what the circumstances, as to whether we're employees or whether we're not employees.
So what we could do, we could define, like we could remove volunteers and define employees and just simply state in the definition of employees that for the purpose of this policy, because you're right, it has, depending on the subject, might be different, but for the purpose of this policy, that members of the Mahone Bay District Fire Department would be considered to be employees. And then you wouldn't need to reference volunteers otherwise, because it is true that we don't have rec volunteers, which is typically, you're talking about municipal volunteers. We don't have that kind of volunteers involved with program delivery. So that's an option, certainly.
What about, I'm just throwing this out, the staff in the summertime that work at the pool? Would they be required to be vaccinated?
So no one at the pool is an employee of or volunteer for the town, but there is a very good question there. Should we extend the policy to cover the pool society volunteers and staff who are working on it at a town facility? And would that also extend to other organizations that the town has working on our behalf, such as the Wood Boat Society, who have employees that take care of the
Yeah.
washrooms, for example.
Yeah, who are dealing with the public, who are in close proximity to the public. You know, the firefighters, first responders. I would hate to think that a firefighter would carry COVID to,
Yeah, that's,
someone who is, isolated in their home sort of thing and needs assistance. Or that a boater arrives from somewhere and comes into contact with one of our staff who is not vaccinated.
a lot of the fire departments have, I shouldn't say a lot, but fire departments right now are tasked with deciding themselves whether they want to implement the policy of whether they want their employees to be vaccinated or not. I know there's a couple within the county that have taken that step. I'm not sure of the other numbers, but, I'm a strong supporter of doing that, because like you said, the last thing we need is for our first responders to be responding. And we do get calls for medical calls where the person has been screened COVID positive. And we
Yeah.
take all the
And
steps.
They're
Yeah.
protecting themselves in the case.
We're protecting ourselves by doing that and protecting the rest of the public. And I think that's what we're there for, is to protect the public from all kinds of things, not just
Mhm.
fire. So,
Mhm.
I'm a strong supporter of including the fire department in that.
Councilor Bird?
Thank you. It seems to me, when I read a fairly reasonable document, I think that if we were not to require vaccination in these cases, then there would have to be testing. And that is not, like, logistically, that's a difficult, and practically speaking, that's a difficult thing to do, especially in a volunteer situation, So given that the overall percentage in Nova Scotia is quite high, I think, my understanding is that it's quite high with the uptake with the vaccine, that I think that this is on the right track.
And as you think about contractors who come into this building to work, if all of our staff are vaccinated, both or triple vaccinated, then they will not likely have an issue with someone who comes in who is not themselves vaccinated. So we would not extend this to a contractor.
It says on the contractors that it would be at my discretion, and I think it would be based on the extent to which they're working in a public service
Proximity
position.
to-
So like
yeah.
we could like Upland, for example. We've contracted Upland to carry out public engagement activities. From my point of view, we would require those staff to be vaccinated,
Yeah.
which I believe they would be anyway, but. So that discretion has to do with like a contractor who's working on constructing something like a fence. They're not working with the public and it really doesn't matter. So I guess that's the discretion it would be.
And you don't see that as something that would be included in this policy?
The way the policy is written now, it leaves the discretion to me about contractors. So rather than saying all contractors, which would include contractors who might be delivering a product and not doing any work in the community.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
That's the bottom of the scope.
Councillor Carver?
Yes, I'd just like some clarification around the categories that the policy applies to. So have we eliminated volunteers from the list?
I don't think we've made any changes, but I'm contemplating what I may be directed to bring back as options on the 14th. So one of the options would be removing volunteers, but trying to specify all those situations where the fire being the main one. But I think it is important to note that the Pool Society and Wind Boat Society do have volunteers who would be working on our behalf.
So just taking this a little further, committee members, members of the public who have volunteered to be committee members could also be considered volunteers. So they're sort of mentioned twice in that regard.
Yeah, and I think if we decided we didn't want to include committee members, then whether or not volunteers is in there, I would define to the exclusion of committee members. I need to put that in somehow.
Or in particular, the exclusion of committee members if the meetings are going to be held electronically. But if they're going to be held in this room, that I think they should be. To go, and that goes to the deputy mayor's point about if it's going to be an electronic meeting, if somebody can choose to participate through the video links, then they would not necessarily have to be vaccinated.
But are we able to guarantee, like, I'm just wondering in terms of how we would put that in a policy? What if it changed? What if a committee that was meeting remotely, the policy would still exist? So then they would become required? Would that be
No,
the
but,
thinking?
well, that they would have the choice, the person could still participate remotely. We could all sit around this table as vaccinated members of a committee. And the one person who is chosen for whatever reason not to get vaccinated, they would participate
So it'd be
electronically.
more, it would be a pretty specific exemption that we'd have to include, but we'd essentially say committee members are not required to be, or are required to be vaccinated. Committee members who are not vaccinated will be accommodated to participate remotely, like something
Yeah.
along those lines.
If you're required to-
Or you could just make, make it a gate to get into the building. So you don't have to specifically talk about, it's just that you can't come to town hall and be in the council chambers unless you're vaccinated. And if the meeting happens to be here, well, that means you can't participate unless you want to remotely.
Isn't that legislated right now?
To come to a committee meeting,
Not to come to a committee meeting,
Come
to come to council chamber, isn't it legislated right now? That you have to be double vaccinated?
so if you're on a, well, Lois, do you want to handle this one?
We cannot ask for proof of vaccination unless there is another way for people to participate remotely. So this evening, we can say that this is not open to the public, obviously for spacing reasons in here, but also because there is another way for people to participate. If we do not have another way for people to participate remotely, then we are not able to prevent them from taking part in the democratic process due to vaccination status. So as long as we continue to live stream, we can do that. But if we ever stop doing that, then we cannot require a proof of vaccination.
So
As
if
it's
and
written
when,
today.
so if and when we open up that we have a gallery in here, then as long as we have the live streaming that they can participate in, we can ask the ones that come in here to show proof.
We can require that they show proof of vaccination.
Okay, Councillor Wilson.
I'm just a little confused. Is this a regulation from the province or is?
I
Yes.
believe it is from the provincial Department of Health as part of the emergency health order when they set these parameters.
But you can tell people they can't come to a cocktail party, for example, unless they can show proof of vaccination.
You can have up to 25 people in your home.
So the sensitivity here is around participation in the democratic process.
Yeah.
So the town could hold events, we could certainly exclude people from, but not regular meetings of council or committees.
Not, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's a regular meeting of council, either people have to be admitted, or if we're going to require them to be double vaccinated, we have to provide an alternative means, like live streaming, for citizens to participate. Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, my other thought is, I wonder if under the clause around the definition of fully vaccinated, CAO, you may want to build another paragraph that allows the policy to keep up with the evolution of that definition. So the mayor used the term triple vaccinated, boosters are rolling out by Christmas. I'm sure by next March, there'll be new protocols, there'll be new vaccines, and I just don't know.
There'll be a new variant by next March.
Quite possibly, and I wonder if we want the policy to be a little more dynamic in aligning with whatever the health authority deems to be fully vaccinated, whatever that definition is. Versus, I think this is an excellent start on page 1. That's a solid definition, but I think there's probably already people in the room that have booster shots. schedule between now and Christmas.
December 9th.
December 9th. So, down the road, will having the booster be part of the criteria to be fully vaccinated? Maybe in March, maybe it will be. So, anyway, I wouldn't want to have the CEO to be rushing back every 60 days with a new amendment to the policy to align with whatever the evolution of that criteria is.
Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Now.
You could probably reference the province's definition of that particular point, so that you're not finding it in the document, but you're requiring it to.
Yeah, we'll see if there's something we can take into externally.
Councillor Now.
That's basically what I was gonna say is, we maybe could put in there, fully vaccinated as determined by the provincial Department of Health. Because
As long as they are making that determination, there have been a few times, like when someone was returning to work from having been infected, where they were not willing to be pinned down on when someone was allowed to return to work. So I would hope that they're willing to be pinned down with a definition of vaccinated that remains current. And that's really, I'll just determine that between now and our next meeting, and I can make that change. Yeah.
And if someone is required to demonstrate that they do have the appropriate level of vaccination, as it may change, it'll be someone on your staff who cites the paperwork and just records that they've got the appropriate level of vaccination.
Yeah, we will have to look at how we keep records around the proof of vaccination.
Most places don't even keep a copy of it. They just,
I
show it to Mo, she makes a mark in the book kind of thing, and that's all there is to it.
Actually, generally, it's you show it to me and I let you in, and then there are no questions asked. No record, no questions, just everybody knows.
But you know.
Right.
So you now have to remember everyone whose paperwork you've seen.
I see it, they can go in, or I don't see it and they can't go in. Because we run into an issue of having private medical records if we keep some record.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
But obviously, we won't ask staff every time they enter the building. So there are some things that we can keep records of. We just have to be clear on what we
I was
can.
gonna say, you don't wanna have to ask that every time we have a council meeting.
And there probably is a limitation as to how long, like we'll record the date of the original proof because it's not good forever. And so that's something to consider.
That's another provincial determination, I think, the health department. Councillor Carter.
Well, given that even people who are double vaccinated can contract COVID, and the CAO just mentioned a situation where somebody who's recovering or recovered from COVID comes back, and how do you know that they are fully recovered? So is there room in this policy possibly to include a negative COVID test
Requirement for?
requirement? If there has been a situation that the person has contracted COVID.
I think it would be outside of the scope of this policy to do that.
Because this is a vaccination policy, not a.
Yeah, and it keeps going.
Right,
You know?
but it's an interesting question.
The nursing home has a policy, if they have a staffer who tests positive, they have to have 2 negative tests 2 weeks apart before they can come back to work. So. But you're right, I don't know if this policy would be.
No, and I mean, I don't want to get into it a whole lot, but I do feel like we are comfortable, as you say, like the nursing home, to be able to evaluate that. Yeah.
And then you link it to the provincial health department as they become more aware of the rigors of COVID, then they become the barometer for what we're doing and what we're able to do. Okay.
So I think there's a couple of things that I'm gonna look into. I don't necessarily need direction on, but with respect to the inclusion of employees and volunteers of societies working on our behalf, is that is that generally something that people want to see a version amended to reflect? And I'm talking about the marina and the pool, for example.
Yeah.
Find it, I could think it can be linked to town premise, like we own the facilities.
Before we leave that point, what is the board? Is there a definition?
Well, so it was just referencing when there is a situation of people serving on a board. So it was meant to be board and committee members. It's volunteers and board and committee members.
But a board is more an external.
Yeah, so I mean, where we are not responsible for any external board that I can think of, our members would already be included in counselors and volunteers. So I suppose we could remove reference to board members. The only example I can think of is the housing board. We have a volunteer member on the housing board.
Well, and there's a board of this, the Senior Safety Partnership Society. That's a board.
Yeah. But also our only members of council. So they'd still be covered. But if we drop committee, if I drop board members, then our member on the housing board would be the only person I can think of who would be excluded.
Who's our housing? Do we have a counselor housing?
No, we have a member of the public, so that means they wouldn't.
Oh,
otherwise
I
be
see.
covered.
Oh.
Those are
But at
somebody-
any rate, I think that because it's external, I don't think it should be in this policy.
It should be up to that board to make that determination.
We have somebody in the libraries board.
Yes.
So if we leave board out, then it, as you say, it will be up to those organizations to determine that. Okay, well, I can also look at that.
Okay. Counselor now.
Just a quick question. Once this policy comes into effect, then all the proof of vaccinations have to be shown to the town. Like with the fire department, it wouldn't be within there, but they would have to show the proof to the town.
Yeah, we'd have to set up some opportunity for that to
Yeah,
happen.
exactly. Okay, good.
Okay. Anyone else? CAO, do you have everything you need?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, who knows when we get to the next meeting if this will be everything, but we'll do what we can.
I saw a notice tonight, they were talking about the outbreaks in Europe. 700,000 deaths anticipated this winter, and there's a new variant that they're dealing with. So this would be number 6. So hold on to your hat. Okay. So we'll see that again next meeting, I guess. Will we see CAO?
Yeah, we'll see it and we'll see some potential revisions.
Okay. Then let's go to the water system loss audit.
So they're looking forward to presenting this, the results of this water system loss audit that was carried out over the past several months by our former water operator working with Xylem. I should note here that we did have an offer from Xylem staff person Kingsley, who worked closely with Megan on this project, to present the results. So if council would like to have a presentation of the results, we can put that on an upcoming meeting agenda, probably our next meeting agenda. I guess I was a little bit enthusiastic to share the results, and Megan basically got finished this on her last week of work here. We did find some things that I think are, immediately relevant. And in fact, I don't want to spoiler it, but, when we get into the part about leaks, we are trying to follow up on those sooner rather than later. But if council would like, I know Kingsley was quite willing to do that. So that's really at your discretion if you want to have a presentation of results. But in the meantime, happy to answer questions about the results. And there is a recommendation here. It's just looking further ahead at the recommendations of the audit, mostly which are procedural and operational, but there are a couple which could have budgetary consequences.
Councilor Feeney?
Mayor, did have a chance to read the audit. And I think staff is good. Dylan, it's fair to say staff will prepare kind of a greatest hits list of the top 3 or 4 priorities as they would require capital. And that will show up in the next.
Well, I would like to get the motion, but if, you know, we would have a report where we take that final page that lists all the recommendations. And we can say either this is one that will be taken care of at a procedural level, or this is one where we have a recommendation to budget for the number.
Well, hearing that, Mayor, I move that the council direct staff to provide a staff report highlighting the recommendations of the water system audit, for which additional budget allocations would be required for implementation. And that would be ahead of the 22-23 budget process.
Seconded by Councillor Carver. I saw your hand
In
first.
alphabetical order, if you like.
Okay, you've heard the motion on the question. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to the committee, a committee applicant that we have. Clerk, did you want to?
Members of council were forwarded an application to serve on a committee. At this point, we still have one community volunteer position available on the asset management committee. And having received the application, council can now make a decision or not. It's up to you.
Okay, Councillor Carver.
Yes, Your Worship, I would move that Patricia Sharp be appointed to the Asset Management Committee.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Now. On the motion. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to Councillor Carver, Recreation Funding.
So I am a participant in the Mahone Bay Seniors Fun and Fitness Exercise Group, which is held twice a week for chunks of time in the Legion Hall. And I'm also aware that the teacher who leads this class also leads a class in Lunenburg using the very same routine. And the fees for the two classes are quite different, with the fees in Lunenburg being lower rather, I'm sorry, significantly lower. And it occurred to me that because this is recreation that is being held in the town of Mahone Bay and is serving residents of the town as well as people who live nearby the town, that possibly there's a way of making the fees lower, and which might include, which might attract more people to this class, make it more accessible financially. And the rent that Modal is paying to the Legion for each class is $20 a class. So I'm hoping that council would consider covering the rental costs at the Legion with a view to reducing the fees charged. So our motion is that council approve a grant to Modal in the amount of the Legion rental costs for the Mahone Bay Seniors Fun and Fitness class, with the intention of reducing the fees charged, and that this grant be implemented as soon as possible.
And this is 23, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor?
No, just second.
Seconded, thank you. This is 23 sessions that they're having?
This particular session has 23 classes. That's between September and December.
And the Legion's
The session will be January to Easter roughly, and then there's a third one in the late spring.
Okay. And it's $20 per class for 23 classes.
For this round, I don't know how many classes there will be in the next session.
Okay. So that's 400 for this round. and just say the same number for the next two.
Yeah.
Which makes it for 1,200 for the year. Okay? Any other questions or comments? Counselor Feeney?
Mayor, I'm just wondering if there's any virtue in the positioning of having the grant go directly to the Legion versus from the town of Mombay to modal to the Legion. To accomplish the same objective. I'm thinking about as it relates to the positioning of all the grants next year in the budget process. Having a grant that's specifically denoted for this purpose, but the grant going to the Legion may be beneficial. I'm open-minded either way, but not sure if the CAO has any thoughts about the transfer of funds between municipal units.
And so we are just looking at the cost of this one portion, because the next two would be accommodated through our budget process for 22-23, would it not? Your motion is for one set of 23 classes.
No, it's forever.
It would be ongoing for review.
Okay. Council CAO and then the deputy mayor.
I think the key thing was that it was a grant. So, if the Legion would accept it as a grant for that purpose, typically the organizer would be the right party to provide the grant to. And we do provide a grant to MODL for recreation currently under the Kids Fair Play, Pro Kids, the Pro Kids program. So, we have already a grant to modal for recreational purposes. This would be another one. But I think the key thing is that it be understood as a grant and not recreation programming as a budget line. So, in that way, that's really council discretion. I did want to say though, after this year, Town of Lunenburg is providing space in the town facility. We will have that option beginning next year with the fire station being completed. So I think we may want to consider in these circumstances that I understand the Legion probably does appreciate the revenue from these, but if the town were going to make an intervention, that might be the appropriate intervention.
He's big words for my mouth. That's basically what I wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, if it's going to be an ongoing cost rather than spending, we'll have a facility.
So
That's, hold on, sorry. Go ahead.
that's it. I was just gonna say, you said this is for 23 sessions. We've already had some of those sessions.
That's for this, yeah.
This one here.
Those 23.
I think
Those
also
23
December.
sessions are almost finished, that's right.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, we can't really backstep it to refund the people their money from
Agreed.
ones they've already had.
Yeah.
So, I'm just trying to think of how we can work it so that we subsidize the rest of them. So it's gonna reduce it for now until the end of the year. And like we said, if we're gonna have a facility where we can host it ourselves without that, then maybe come the early part of next year. When's the next one start, do you know? Penny?
January.
Maybe January. So,
So another round of 23 starts in January.
It would be 23 or 24.
Okay.
Depending.
Well, I think we could assume that that one will run its course at the Legion, if that's where they're gonna start in January, so.
Yes, Councillor Kerr.
I'm having some apprehension now about the idea of this motion, then sort of forcing the issue of the classes being switched to a different facility, simply because they've been hosted there for so many years, many years, decades. Yeah, I'm feeling apprehensive about that.
It's a discussion probably for the grants part of the budget for 2022-23 at that point.
Councillor Purdy?
And if the grant goes to modal, then that might be something that's determined later anyway, and then that could be presented to them for consideration. If or when it gets to that point, because that wouldn't be for a while yet anyway, I would imagine. Did we second this? Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Mayor did, yeah. So Anything else on the motion, on the question? Councillor Carver? Looking pensive down there.
I am feeling very pensive and wondering about sort of reframing the motion to have staff explore the possibility with modal staff whether this would work to reduce fees. I'm just thinking out loud here, and the deputy mayor's going to weigh in.
Yeah, well, the second, my proposal will be that we just let's chew, I guess, the elephant in small bits. Sort of do a grant for the next session, and then bring the issue back when we're doing, I guess, during budget, and then we can discuss whether it's going to be a grant going forward, or, and then at that time we can have that nuances of whether model will accept and things like that, so that you don't go away without the grant.
Yeah.
Your seconder has made a friendly amendment, Councillor
Carver. Well, I don't think it needs to be changed.
No, I
I don't think it needs to be changed, but it doesn't specify.
More about how we look at it.
Yeah.
All right. Councillor now, any comment?
I agree with what the deputy mayor said. Maybe we should give them the grant for January for the next 23 weeks after that.
Yeah.
And that will take us into the next budget year,
Close,
where we
yeah.
can include it in our budgetary process.
Okay. And we're happy that the motion is made and seconded accommodates that situation.
And I hope that the arithmetic actually works out to enable the fees to be reduced.
Okay,
Maybe staff should discuss that with Modal, though, make sure that
Yeah.
that money is gonna go towards reducing the fees for these participants. No, we don't want to do it if it's not.
Yeah, but I think
it's not
I think the way the motion is written is as far as we can go. I mean, if it's a grant, if we start attaching strings and saying it's for a certain number of courses, then it's not a grant, at least the federal government wouldn't consider it to be one.
okay. You've heard the motion. On the question? All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, let's go to the Asset Management Committee, the draft minutes. Sorry, Councillor
I
Carver?
think, didn't you have an amendment to the agenda to include the information?
That, I thought that was under new business.
Well, it's new business, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. All right. Asset Management Committee, the draft minutes. Anyone have any questions? What about the Oakland, oh wait, no.
The Oakland Lake one was so good, we put it in there twice.
Maybe sure we're gonna
Yeah.
put it.
Okay,
You only have to look at it one time.
and let's go look at Oakland Lake. There's nothing down, there's any motions there. No. Right, so let's go look at Warrenburg County Senior Safety Program.
I just want to say that we are looking at our budget for 22-23, and I'll let you know now that we have not heard anything from the province about any increased funding from the province. We are gearing up to ask the municipalities for more money, and we know that municipalities don't like to increase their contributions without seeing a provincial increase. But we're just waiting to hear from the province what kind of money they're going to give. Currently, our budget is very, very tight. We may not be able to sustain the additional part-time staff that we've been able to arrange through some reserves or through grants and project funding. So we're really advocating with the province to recognize that counties like Lunenburg County with large populations and large geographic areas receives exactly the same amount of money from the province, $25,000 a year, as counties with population of 8,000 and smaller geography. So there are some inequities there. That's the way the funding was set up, just flat rate. It was increased in 2018 from 20,000 to 25,000, and that was a 3-year contract. So we're still waiting to hear what the next 3-year package will look like, and it's a new government, and we just don't know. So I'm letting you know in advance, we'll be hearing this again because we're just gearing up to write letters to the municipalities to let them know what the situation is.
CAO?
Might overlap. I had 2 questions. I'll just do one. I just see in here a note saying that the LCSSP has declined funding offered through Taming the Octopus project under Aging Well Together Coalition for the Rental Housing Directory project. Is there any elaboration you could offer on that?
Yeah, again, we had after the main Taming the Octopus project, there was $5,300 left over. So the Aging Well Together Coalition, which had sponsored that project, decided to dedicate it to the senior safety program because they were developing this rental directory, planning to. When they got into the nitty gritty of it, they realized it was going to be more complicated than they thought, and also there was some resistance from landlords to participate by providing a lot of information. So it just wasn't going to work. So
it's going to come with responsibilities that this would have paid for. This wouldn't have otherwise contributed to the.
Oh, no, it wouldn't. No.
Yeah.
It was to do that project. It was a rental.
So they declined to do the work, and then they declined the grant that would have covered.
Right. So the $5,300 has come back. So Taming the Octopus continues to. So we've got a new project. It's a new project.
Tougher octopus than you thought.
Hmm?
A tougher octopus than.
A tougher octopus. This is some tough octopus, let me tell you.
And then I do have another question, but do you want to go?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Recently, some of us had the occasion to learn a little bit more about the combined coordinated access program effort going on in Bridgewater. I may not understand completely. It seems like there was an effort made to create a new or empower or otherwise inject a bunch of funding into an organization that would provide a combined access point or single point of contact. Being a senior safety is a first and in some ways single point of contact service for a lot of residents in the county. Was there an opportunity for maybe some of the funding to go to this organization in the acknowledgement that it could play that role?
I see that $5,300, you mean?
No, the funding that went to establish the coordinated access program through a third party that I don't remember the name of, to be honest.
I can talk about that.
Yeah, I can't, so I'll defer to the deputy mayor.
Yeah, so the senior safety coordinator program, it was represented in the strategic planning for this new open door society that's been created. So that is doing something, I guess, in many ways slightly different from what senior safety does as a whole. What it does try to create is a single access point, but not necessarily meaning that senior safety will not do their role. And so, like as Lisa had probably described, Lisa Ryan was the consultant who was working for the town of Bridgewater in setting this up. The coordinated access system is about centralizing or trying to create one access point, single point of access for people who are struggling with homelessness and things like that, to eliminate some of the duplication that's happening, duplication in terms of service provision and duplication in terms of people seeking service, whereby you have somebody sometimes even shopping towards different organizations to see what they can offer. So that in many ways is playing a different role. And the way the funding was structured, I don't think there's a way that the Energized Bridgewater project would have taken the funding and given it to the senior safety program directly, because the funds are not targeting what senior safety does, I guess, in particular. So I think in many ways, this program will help what senior safety does by creating a more, I guess, coordinated process across the community, because from my perspective, there's lots of duplication, and this will sort of identify that and create a system whereby you can see where the monies are going into this community and who they are serving. Right now, you can't tell. It might be the same people that are being served by all these organizations, and they're getting lots of funding from different places. So down there, I mean, right now it sort of feels like it might be I guess a tenuous situation, but down the road it will create a lot more clarity for us, folks who are doing governance, and even for service providers. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, it's appreciated. It's hard not to see, this existing program that is used struggling for funding and a new program being created to essentially bring people to this program, which may or may not still exist at that point.
Yeah.
But understand that the funding was for what it was for, and it's federal funding, so Bridgewater probably didn't have a lot of choice.
And
And
Lisa,
maybe just a follow-up. Well, in the conversations, there were two options in terms of strategically setting up this program. They either have gone with an existing service provider to be the central point and to be, I guess, the holders of the system, or to go with a new nonprofit. And everybody sort of agreed that it would be easier to do a new nonprofit to not be encumbered in some of the historical pieces that have been in the past. And so
So senior safety probably felt that they did not want to take on that role.
that would be my assumption, because senior safety was part, at least Chris was part of the process in the conversations.
Yeah, I see them as separate, linked, but separate. Definitely, so senior safety will be feeding in information into the data bank in the single entry system. And they'll also be, I assume, when it gets operational, be receiving referrals or looking for support. But senior safety is involved with so many other things other than housing, but definitely connected, but separate.
Councilor Burdick?
This just makes me wonder if we should have Lisa do a little presentation for us as counselors, because it is a new program, and I think some of us have had access to the information through some of the committees that we're on, but I don't know if everybody is familiar with the program.
I spoke with her yesterday. She did a presentation at mayor's deputies and CAOs yesterday in Chester. And after it was over, I asked her if she would be interested to do just that. And I did suggest that perhaps a council meeting might not give her enough time to talk about what she wants to talk about and to address questions from the floor. And I said, if we can organize something for a daytime session, or a night, I suppose, but she will come here and give us a presentation on that program. So,
Yeah.
I guess it would be to find out when she's available, and then if we can get a couple of dates to choose from, we'll do one of those friendly doodle poll things.
I wonder about possibilities of doing that kind of session, but for all 5 councils at the same time. It would be an interesting conversation opportunity, I think.
Well, I can certainly put the matter out there through, electronically, if other councils might be interested. I mean, if we can get her to a date, then what will change is where we have the session, whether we have it here or we have it at the Legion or whatever, the new fire hall. Are we agreed that we will try to set one of those up with her?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Councillor Carver, for bringing that up.
Well, thank you for the questions and interest in the whole topic.
And you've got 2 sets of NJSB minutes in there. Any questions on those?
Timely as always.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, really current, especially when you get old and can't remember what happened yesterday. Yes, Deputy
Yeah,
Mayor.
it might not be, I guess, very serious, but I'm just wondering in this day and age, why we're getting scanned minutes.
What, that they must have been printed out and.
You know, as late as they
Faxed to
are.
us.
you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I think
I know you have a comment, do you want to make it?
I have made my comment many times, but the answer to that question is because they're printed out for the various areas. So where it is an external, I mean, even our minutes, they're printed out and then signed. There's an actual signature on the minutes from the mayor and the clerk, and those are the record. So that's why.
There's also why it's so long in the past, because it goes to the next meeting, gets approved, then gets signed off, then gets scanned, then we get.
Yeah,
Which is my, I guess, roundabout way of saying, why go through all that delay? You can send us a draft so that we know what's being discussed. We don't.
I'm gonna ask
We don't need to
the
sign.
question.
So at least we're current and not talking about July.
Yeah, that's a bit much, July, even with the meeting being held up lately, it's been every 2 months. So if you meet and then it's 2 months before you get the minutes back to proof them
Yeah.
as a group and accept the minutes, and then they go away and they come back and get signed off. Yeah, it does take a long time. It does take a long time. Okay, let's go to new business. We have 2 things. One of them, Deputy Mayor, you want to talk about the discussion from yesterday?
So at the deputies and mayors and CEOs meeting yesterday, the regional anti-racism task force made a pitch to all the, I guess, municipal units to consider expanding the task force to be a regional task force rather than I guess a regional standalone task force. There were a few reasons for that. One, I think, was the issue of funding and accessing funding for the task force and the work that's required. I think for those who don't know, in this room, I am no longer part of the task force, and part of the reason why I am not is that the workload is just too much for me. I had at some point to say, well, what am I shedding? And the task force was one of them. And it's very good work that needs to be done, but it's very tasking, and more so, at least from my side of things, perspective, is it taxing physically and emotionally? And so there's a lot of load to carry when you're talking about things that affect you and impact you on a day-to-day basis, and yet bring ideas to the table and there's no ability to move them because there's no funding, there's not, I guess, a quick uptake in terms of the ideas. And so I just felt that maybe with a regional model, there is access to funding through various provincial and federal efforts, and so there might be an opportunity to do things differently, and also maybe there might be commitment councils can make to go the same route as the accessibility legislation setup, to get a regional or a shared resource person who can be able to move things forward. So that it's not it's not all being lumped on to volunteers. Most of the folks who are on the task force actually live outside the town of Bridgewater. It's only maybe, I think, one person, two folks, because the mayor is probably who live in the town, and so there's a question as to whether to expand. It was well received by
Yep, very much so.
by everyone. The question had been asked probably 6-8 months ago whether we should go regional. At that time, there wasn't support for that. Bridgewater wanted to go to try on their own. Lunenburg had something ongoing, and Chester was also initiating something on their side. So there is support for it, and the agreement was that somebody will try and steer, I guess, a conversation amongst CAOs, staff, to come up with a framework as to how that can work. And at some point down the road, before the next budget, there might be conversations that might come to the table to sort of see if there is something that council would like to support in some way, shape, or form.
And
Still very early right now.
there was agreement around the table that we would at least raise the issue with our councils to see if conceptually there was support for the program. And also that at some point, if we were able to establish a staff person, a resource, like we do with the accessibility program, a region-wide contact point to work with the councils on the project. And of course, we would be paying for that. But with Chester and Lunenburg and Bridgewater and MODL and Little Ol' Us, the amount of financial commitment that we would be making would be relatively small. I can't give you a number. I don't know what it would be. But it will be based on population, like everything else is that we do across the region.
Not to preempt, but those are the conversations that this, I guess, CAOs will probably be having to figure out what kind of framework and approach can be taken.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, can I speak to that briefly?
Yes, please.
It's been likened to the accessibility committee and the way that was approached. And if it were to take place that way, and obviously there are distinctions, this isn't being driven by provincial legislative deadline, for example. We took a period of time with the committee, once it was established, to define essentially the terms under which we would all cooperate on accessibility. And that could be, the way you described the Lunenburg County accessibility plan document was to say, these things on which we agree, these will then form the basis of the work for our shared staff person. And during that period where we did that work, and a couple of members of council here were on there at the time, and as I, there was a commitment from each municipality to appoint a council member and a staff person to participate in that process. And particularly MODL stepped up and appointed a staff person who was the coordinator, essentially, for the committee's work. And they did that at their own expense. That wasn't cost shared. My time wasn't compensated by MODL, so I was there participating, but I have to say they really took on the lion's share to make sure those meetings happened, oversee all of that. And then once the different councils had agreed to those terms, we all agreed to a shared position. That position is not split on the basis of population. That position is split relatively straight time between the units. So it's not on the, we each have an amount of time that person spends working on our behalf, and we're compensating on the basis of time to Chester.
My mistake.
Yeah.
Apologize.
Yeah, and Chester hosts that position, but that was just by mutual agreement that they were in a position to do that.
That may or may not be the situation.
Yeah,
With this
exactly.
one.
I can't say it would be, but I think it's important that there be a willingness to not put the cart before the horse with the construction of that ongoing position. If, for example, and Bridgewater left the room right when we talked about this, but if Bridgewater were willing to take on that initial role of coordinating the setup of the committee with a defined mandate to come back with a recommendation to the councils, that would be my off-the-cuff suggestion as to how we handle that. and then we all have a recommendation going forward on the establishment of an ongoing position, for which we would all better understand by that point what the scope of work was going
Yes.
to be.
But that at this point, conceptually, we do support the initiative. Right? Yes, please.
So the people around the table at mayors and deputies and CAOs support the initiative.
Absolutely.
Right, so is the question for us as a council whether we support it tonight? Because I certainly,
In as much as you've got something to support at this point. Yes.
it seems to me that, well, first of all, I think it's a really good idea to make it a regional initiative.
Mhm.
I always was concerned about the kind of balkanization of the towns, and
Mhm.
it made much more sense to go regionally, but I am confused now about the process. It sounds like a decision was made at mayors and deputies.
Motions are not made at mayors, deputies, CAOs.
So
Decisions, formal decisions are not taken.
So do we need to make a motion or make a formal decision?
That was my understanding from yesterday's meeting, that we were each in turn going to broach the issue with our councils and get a measure of their support for the proposed group or the proposed regional committee, and having a person associated with it. Deputy Mayor?
So, from my perspective, the idea is that the mayors and deputies and CEOs are in agreement to explore whether this is something that can be workable to make it regional. And so the exploration in many ways has the blessings of mayors and CEOs. I think the question in terms of, if there's a question in terms of bringing to the table, is making sure that you folks are appraised as to what is happening. So that if a proposal comes to the table that, or maybe the CEO mentions that they've been meeting on this and this pieces, it doesn't come, it doesn't just come as a surprise. At least you know this conversation has been had. I don't think there's a decision to be made tonight, at least from my perspective. It's just a case of making sure that you folks know what's going on rather than it being discussed by these high and mighty folks, not having council really feeling praised of what's happening. Yes, that's how I look at it.
There is no decision to be made. Just to let you know what was discussed, and if it goes forward, something may come back to the table. So if you feel now that you just can't support it, then say so. But if you can, let's pursue it and see what develops.
And just procedurally, obviously this is new business. New business is a great way to share information. We can't do any motions anyway. If there was a desire to communicate to Bridgewater on behalf of the council, a notice of motion or a motion being put in the next meeting package to do a letter to Bridgewater in this regard could certainly be entertained, but it would have to be at the next meeting, like it would have to, yeah.
Okay.
There's nobody else is putting up their hand to make a notice of motion to that effect. I would do so.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Deputy Mayor, you okay with that now? Good. Let's look at the paper that I gave you. 2 meetings that occurred with Minister Lohr, who is the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. He's also the minister responsible for military relations.
You block the camera.
Oh.
Woo, look at that. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. 2 meetings. One of them was here in the council chamber, and the other one was through NSFM the following day. And the notes on the meeting for Tuesday, the 23rd, are largely comments that the CAO had recorded at the meeting. We did talk about ICIP. That was one of the things that we brought up. And you know that we had an application in on the last round of allocations. And I think they're getting ready to do a new application called CAO.
Yeah, it's not entirely clear if it'll be a new call or visiting
Pick up
existing,
the old one.
but you know, ultimately we've updated our information each of the last 2 years, so we're prepared to do that again.
Of course, we asked about the Shoreline Program. And as it says, the Deputy Minister, Mr. LaFleche, and Mark Peck, who is the Associate Deputy Minister, indicated that the province might have funds to supplement federal funding for shoreline improvement, but they were not particularly specific. They were, as usual, quite vague. We talked about transit. Talked about follow-up with the TIR at the province regarding transit, car share, ride share. But it did not really provide us with any firm direction. CAO raised the points about area and our appreciation for the province's support on our solar package. Housing was discussed. And again, they focused on vacant properties as they have in other communications. And we referenced housing. We noted some housing projects that are currently being proposed for the town. And the service level exchange was raised as it relates to roads and etc., but there were no specifics. It was, he was here for almost 2 hours, I think. An hour and a half to 2 hours approximately. For those of you that have met the deputy ministers or the ministers before, it was fairly typical. But Councillor Carver?
I just wanted to mention one thing about housing. Well, first of all, they asked us about short-term accommodations and whether that was a problem here. So they were anticipating that we would have said so. So we said it's a problem. But they suggested that we contact Stefan Richard in that department of housing if we wanted to talk more about housing, to sort of have and to use him as a resource if we wanted to explore some ideas. I've had some contact with him. I don't know if you have, Dylan. I can't even remember what it was, but I remember being impressed by his openness and his wish to be engaged, his real enthusiasm about being engaged with other levels, other people. So we could keep that in mind, either for ourselves or if we wanted to do some conversation jointly, or if we wanted to think about inviting him to Shack.
Sorry for interrupting you. Tiana, who presented at Shack at the last meeting, was presented because we reached out to Stefan.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then on the 24th, there was a meeting. It was an NSFM video conference thing. It was mayors and wardens only. There was, the question was asked about the CAOs participating, and the answer was no. This is just for mayors and wardens. And you'll notice the last item on that page, the back page, is that the minister suggested he would be visiting every CAO to hear their perspectives on the questions, but the CAOs were not at this meeting by design, I guess. So what he did, he got on the call and he introduced himself and he talked about his background. And then he said, I'll address your questions. He didn't really offer any comments. He responded to questions. And one of or actually the first question that came up was the municipality in Cape Breton, I
Port
think,
Hawkesbury.
Port Hawkesbury, where they tried to rezone a piece of property and the department said no. And the person was still upset about it. Minister noted that the MGA does not allow for any appeals. But he did take that opportunity to say he really appreciated the opportunity for municipalities and the department to chat.
So, I mean, I really think this is a salient issue. I mean, this was a situation where the municipal unit wanted to re-characterize previously zoned residential land as parkland. Something very similar to another, close to home scenario. And the municipality, the provincial government vetoed that with some overriding power that I think it's fair to say a lot of municipalities wouldn't have understood that the province wanted to dip their beak into that, that they even had that authority.
Yeah.
So I do think this is an interesting precedent that was just established last week. But this isn't about the landowners. This is about the town who wanted to
piece of town property.
No, I don't believe it was town property, was it? It might have been, but anyway,
No
I think
subdivision.
it's a really interesting scenario.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see how, I think this is a good example of where we really need to have a level of advocacy from the NSFM. Right, I always mess that one up. But I really think that I think we should try to circle the wagons and try to see if there's appetite from the rest of the municipalities to have a discussion on that point. Because it's not crystal clear to me that if this happened there, why would the province allow us to rezone, property and turn it into parkland? You got to think that could cause us some issues.
Councillor Burdick.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Feeney is bringing this topic up, and I know Councillor Carver had before. And it is an interesting thing. I think we're not alone. There's going to be lots of different municipalities that are in similar situations, but there's also, I like the idea of reaching out to others about this. There can be a really focused rezoning idea here, and the fact that it happened in this one situation, it means that they could do it indeed here, but it also could mean that if enough municipalities are also trying to do similar things, that despite what they're saying about how there not being any ability to dispute that decision, there could be a reassessment of it. Because it does, building is a wise and necessary thing, but it doesn't have to be at the expense of every other aspect of a town. So
that point was raised by the chap who asked the initial question. And his point was, surely members of council and staff know what's going on in the communities. They know better than a bureaucrat sitting in Halifax can know what's going on in the local community. And the minister offered that, that such an opportunity to develop a new balance of understanding between the two groups could be pursued through discussions directed at amending the service level agreements that are pending, or through discussions on the renewal of the MGA. And you'll see later on that the service level agreements and the MGA will have discussions that will result in changes in 2 to 3 years from now, right? That it's not likely to be something that's going to happen in the near future. So whatever's in the MGA that he is citing is not going to change for a while.
But why are our advocates not trying to move that agenda forward? I don't understand why there's silence from the organization.
From NSFM.
I mean, I was shocked when I saw that story. And obviously misinformed that the province had the ability to thwart the will of municipal government as it relates to their own land use bylaws and land use strategies. So if we don't have to talk to council, I have to talk to the MLA to have a piece of property up the street rezoned. Like, that's important information for us to understand. So if this is new news, or where they're availing of some right and privilege that was bestowed many decades ago, fair enough. But I think I think we really need to get some clarity about what that rule is.
Okay, CAO and then Councillor Carter.
So just three things in that regard. The province has always had a role with respect to land use planning. It's typically exercised in a much more policy way, a broader way. So we have statements of provincial interest that are mandated to be reflected in the way that we approach our land use planning. So those are things that are baked right into our municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. But we are the ones in that process who determine how those statements of provincial interest are respected through our planning documents. So this type of an intervention is unusual to my knowledge of it. So I just wanted to note that there is a provincial role, but this way of doing it is unusual. I think also when we're talking about the role of the NSFM in this, I couldn't agree more that there should be something coming from that organization, but the fact that there hasn't been, and the general use of the minister's veto in this case, could have a chilling effect on municipalities in terms of how we approach these decisions. And I think the most important thing is that it not, and the province be forced to exercise this veto over and over and over again, if in fact municipalities start changing their thinking out of fear of the provincial veto being exercised. We're making it that much easier for the province not to have to defend the use of this veto and as they say, apparently engage in a discussion with the municipalities about why they used it and when they would use it, which I mean, a discussion should happen. So if we have a similar case, I think that's no reason for us to hesitate to go ahead with it and see what happens.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, so sorry.
No, go ahead.
From my perspective, we should provoke that decision so that we can actually know where the province stands, and at that particular point, I think to remind the politicians is that you serve the people who live in this town. So if people want that change as a democratic society, then we expect the people who've been elected to those offices to listen. So I think from my perspective, it doesn't send a chilling effect on my side. It just reinforces the fact that maybe we need to check and see where we stand on that and continue with our planning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you. I had wanted to ask the CAO if he understood this veto process, but it sounds like you don't.
Many things within the MGA do require, like it's much like the way that the Prime Minister exercises power by going through the Queen. Like theoretically, the Queen can intervene on all kinds of things, but she's not doing that. And if you look at the way the MGA is written, it very often gives the minister broad ability to intervene. And so I expect that they're following that letter of the way the MGA is written. But when they say we can look at this and revise the MGA, I think that's quite disingenuous. The nature of the document isn't going to change. We're not going to cease to be creatures of the province. It's how they exercise that. It's the relationship that matters.
Well, I like the idea of just going at it with whatever we want to do, that we'll do it. And yes, I support that idea.
Okay. Raise the topic of homelessness, and the minister said it was not his hardship.
It's not what?
It's not his part of his department's responsibility. Housing is part of his responsibility.
Sorry.
I'm not getting out, but not homelessness. That's community services that looks after homelessness. and he was not prepared to comment on the homelessness file because it's not his department. Right? Did mention about revitalizing fire departments. We heard some time ago that they were changing the rules on gas tax funding, that you would be able to use it for fire departments, which we are not allowed to do. But then somebody asked a question because they still can't, and the minister offered that Ottawa has still not sent the proper paperwork to let us know officially in writing that we can use gas tax money for fire department projects. So it's still pending. Someone asked a question about a heritage property, and he noted that that was not his department. That's community, culture, and heritage departments. Talked about the service level agreement, as I said. They're looking for an MOU to be signed within 2 years. And then there would be a period beyond that when an implementation strategy would be put into play. Someone asked if there was any concerns about the possibility of the province downloading further expenses to the municipalities. And of course, he said that, he'd like to see an opportunity for partnerships between the province and the municipalities based on participation. He noted that the topic was part and parcel of the renegotiation of the service level agreements, which will happen over the next 2 years. He suggested further that staff would be reviewing reports that were done in 2011, 2012, 2013. They would use that information to produce a draft for municipalities and rurals to review. In his words, this would be done by creating a straw dog that everyone would get a chance to kick around in the process of give and take. And the outcome of that would be a service level agreement and or an MGA that we could all buy into. And that's when he talked about going to visit the CAOs. So all in all, for having spent 2 hours here and another 2 hours on the telephone call, business as usual. CAO?
Just on the last point about the service exchange, the work that I was glad that they referenced the work that was done in 2011 through 2013 under the former NDP government. At the time, there was a lot of work with municipalities and a lot of consultation that took place. And I think it does offer a much more constructive starting place for this work. And I'm glad to see municipal modernization, the terminology that was created under the last government, seems to have gone away with that government, and we're back to talking about the meat and potatoes issues that we were talking about in 2013. So that seemed positive. Both times that I had the opportunity, I emphasized the need to consult directly with municipalities rather than through NSFM. I hope nobody takes exception to that, but I think there was a great level of engagement directly with municipalities through 2011 through 2013, and we haven't seen that in a long time. So I think that's an important message now. If we're talking about something as significant as the service exchange, we can't be getting filtered information through a small executive group that are largely unaccountable to anyone.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree with that. So let's hope that we can bridge to that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. We'll see.
When were those local conversations about the MGA? I attended one in Liverpool, and it was really dynamic. But I don't think it was in that time frame.
There were more recent consultations on the MGA.
Yeah.
It took place in 16, 17.
That sounds more like it.
Yeah. They may go back to some of that information. I know the process stalled out quite badly
Yeah.
from what they'd originally. They had a pretty ambitious plan and it did not take place that way. Back in 2013, the focus was on the service exchange,
Oh,
not on the language of the MGA.
Mm.
I think actually the work that was done on the MGA more recently could be relevant. I guess I just hope, because I'm looking at the dollars and cents, that they focus on the service exchange more than they focus on the MGA, because I think the MGA is, as the mayor said, it's a very long process. Love to see some updating of it, but we can't necessarily put all our eggs in one basket and say that until we've resolved the council code of conduct and remote meeting participation issues, we can't talk about cost sharing on roads, for example.
And that's been going on forever.
And there's nothing in the MGA that says they won't pay anything towards roads in town, so that's not, it's not in the MGA.
Okay,
I just want to express a concern about the relationship with MSFM. If we are concerned about the lack of efficacy or accountability, what can we do about that?
well, I think if you look at the 5 goals that NSFM has identified, the same 5 goals that they've had for 4 or 5 years, right? I mean, we only just achieved the processing, it's in the works anyway for plastics. But the cap somehow went from number 2 to number 5 on the priority list.
Mhm.
And it's just, the governments have not been particularly responsive to NSFM. And it's been like that now for a number of years. We identify the problems, we take it to the province, we have discussions with the province. There are agreements, I believe, to find a way to resolve them, but it just never seems to get done.
Well, and this isn't the topic, but maybe, I don't know how we had a conversation about this, to put it on the agenda, put it on policy and strategy
Policy and strategy,
committee.
yeah.
I mean, I think that's a really serious problem if we've really lost faith in that advocacy organization. That's a big problem.
I mean, we could bring it up at an NSFM regional meeting, but they don't have them anymore, which is maybe part of the problem.
Right, and I missed the recent towns caucus, so.
You didn't miss anything.
No, I mean, there was nothing there the whole day,
Yeah. Well, let's not get into that now, but
but. Right, maybe another time.
Yes.
We get on the policy and strategy.
agreed.
I agree, I think that's a good.
Is there anyone online that has any questions for her?
No, no questions online.
Are there any people online?
Yes, sir.
Good. Well, thank you, people, for staying with us. We have concluded our agenda. And we are going to go in camera. There's a topic is under the MGA 22.2E on contract negotiations. So we'll ask for a motion to go in camera from the deputy mayor, seconded by Councillor Now. All in favor? Thank you, folks at home. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you hopefully at the next occasion. And don't forget, tomorrow night is the tree lighting ceremony for the Father Christmas Festival in town. That's going to take place in the park across the street from the churches. So if you have a few moments, drop down around 6:30, I think is the beginning time for the event.